those conferences and people ask you, what in the world is that? You have to remember that Moses was born a Jew into a land filled with hatred for the Jews. He was schooled by those who were enslaving his own people. He was surrounded by the lap of luxury while his own people were oppressed and hated and misused and even murdered. Sometimes we think of some of the atrocities that mankind has thrown at other humans, and we think of Hitler. Hitler was only in power for 12 years, from 1933 to 1945, and yet look at what he did. The Jews were enslaved in Egypt for 430 years. That's the longest any culture, any society ever had a group as slaves. In Exodus 2, we see faith amidst the fears. We open up with a couple who meet. I don't know where they met. Maybe at the well, maybe down at the laundromat, maybe at Burger King. I'm not sure. Burger King, send me a gift card, will you? I keep on looking up as if Burger King is up there. I'm speaking to the internet. All right? How do you speak to the internet, okay? But they met. They're of the same tribe. Don't think anything odd about this, but they're in the same tribe of Israel, the tribe of Levi. And by the way, the Levites ultimately would become the priests of the whole nation of Israel. We know from reading on into the story that Amram was the man and Jochebed was the woman. They meet and they marry. When we open up, let me help you understand something, that this child that chapter 2 speaks about is not their first. And so when you take a look at the Bible, sometimes there might be a lapse in the chronology of it all, so you have to read it wisely. Because after they meet and they marry, they first have a daughter. What's her name? Miriam's her name. Miriam. That's Moses' sister. By this time, Miriam is nearly a teenager. She's a young lady. There is a son that has been born to this couple who is 3 years older than Moses. What's Moses' brother's name? Say it. Aaron. All right. And so those two are already in the family. We have to assume that when you look back at chapter 1 and the last verse, it's there on the same page in my Bible, that the edict from Pharaoh was that every little boy would be thrown into the river and drowned. Every daughter of the Hebrews would live. Aaron is 3 years old, so evidently that ruling, that law took place well after Aaron had been born. But there's something supernatural that takes place when Moses is born. Now, let me tell you something. Back way yonder, when I pastored another church, I went to the hospital to see a brand new little baby girl. I made this mistake, by the way. As a matter of fact, this couple reminds me, if I ran into them today, they would remind me of my comments. But when I went to go see that little baby in the hospital, I came Sunday and I said, I went to see so-and-so's baby girl, and it's the most beautiful baby I've ever seen in my life. Well, I didn't realize when I said that I offended every other mother in the church. All right? Listen, I don't know that any of us would think when we looked at our brand new baby that it wasn't the most beautiful baby that had ever been born. Right? Okay. I was looking at our two girls last night. I think they're still beautiful. They think their old man is getting ugly, but I still think they're beautiful children. Well, there's something that I want to help you understand here, because when Amram and Jochebed have this little boy, there is something that they see in this little boy that's not been present in their previous two children. As a matter of fact, there's something obvious about this child that everyone can see is different. Yes, he's beautiful. Way back yonder, I think my grandma Owen said this to me. Pretty is as pretty does. You know that one. Your grandma's taught you that too. Listen, there's something beautiful about this child, but it's something unique. It's something down inside. I think his parents see that he's a child of destiny. That there's a revelation down inside this little baby that's going to be bursting loose. Maybe they looked at Abraham and the prophecy that he made about their people. Maybe they did the math that some 400 years had already lapsed and that a deliverer was going to be born. But there's something about this child. By faith, they overcame the fear and went ahead and had another child. And by God's providential will, it was a little boy that absolutely has a destiny that's going to change history. There is faith here that makes you unafraid. In Hebrews chapter 11, when we read about the story of Moses, the quote is that they hid him for 3 months, not fearing the king's edict. Last week we talked about that you and I have to fear God more than we fear the laws of the land. Now think about this. Here's the family. Here's Jochebed. There is Amram. There is Miriam. And there is Aaron. And now there's this little baby boy. Let's break it down here. I would imagine that Miriam, as almost a teenager, tried to help with this newborn. I would imagine that as a 3-year-old little boy that he teased the baby. All older brothers tease their younger brothers. Amen? Now you know that, okay? And so he was probably a little aggravating to the whole cause here. Amram went out to work every day. Jochebed stayed home and tried to keep it all together. Let me throw in another factor, because the edict from Pharaoh was that all these little newborn boys would be thrown into the Nile River and drowned. And so obviously there's another factor here, and that was that there was policing going on through the slave quarters. I would dare say that Pharaoh would have commanded his soldiers to walk through the village of the slaves. And by now there could have been 2 or 3 million of them, walking through the streets, listening for the whimpering of a newborn. Then pounding on the door, demanding to see, what is that child? Show me. And those little babies would be taken from their mothers and thrown into the Nile River, whether it be 2 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. This is the life story of the Jews, quite frankly. One day in Bethlehem, Jeremiah's prophecy would come true again. It's found in Jeremiah 31. It's repeated in Luke chapter 2. A voice was heard in Ramah, lamentations and weeping and great mourning. Rachel weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted because they are no more. I've been responsible for having a funeral for newborn babies. I want to tell you something. If you ever need to pray for your preacher, it's when he does that. There is something that kills you when your child dies. There can't be words to help. There can't be friends enough to console you. There just can't be enough that would help your heart, because it hurts so much. And that's what's going on in this picture. And yet they protected Moses by faith and a lot of work. They did this for 3 months. They feared God more than Pharaoh, like the midwives that did not kill these little boys when they were first born. And yet this family lived in a small shack, a small hut. In Bible times, we know that there were window openings, but there was no such thing as glass, and so noise would travel. And they just could not keep it up. You might take a look at this and wonder what it was that made them realize that they could not keep hiding this 3-month-old. Well, we don't know, except that if they were caught, there is a possibility that the soldiers would have also removed their other children. And for fear that something was going to happen to the whole family, they realized they could not keep this little baby safe any longer. Now, my imagination went along and went around here a little bit. Bear with me as I share a story with you. But it's one thing to convince one soldier not to do something. I've been in post-communist Romania where the border guards wanted to take things or charge you things, and you would find something in your pocket to bribe them with. Yes, I've done that. There would be something that you might be able to do to one soldier to let you keep your son, but you couldn't convince the whole army. And so down inside of Jochebed's mind, she's thinking, if I could go to the top, straight to the top, maybe my son could be spared. Straight to the top. And so she begins to put together a plan. She thinks that there is someone in charge that if she could just make an appeal to that person without them knowing it, that maybe this child could be spared. I'm reminded of some words of history. Teddy Roosevelt said this, speak softly and carry a big stick. Well, I think Jochebed would absolutely make Teddy Roosevelt proud. You see, she would use the river because Pharaoh said that the baby boys needed to be thrown in the river, right? She's going to use the river, but Pharaoh didn't say how to throw the babies in the river, right? She decides how to do it herself. So she weaves a basket with the tightest of weaves that she could come up with her hands. And she pitches it with tar and goo so that it becomes waterproof. She puts the basket in the water. There's no order as to where the baby would be placed in the water, so she decides to put it right where somebody routinely takes their bath. Great faith, some great planning, a lot of praying. All of this comes about so that God's sovereign will would have its maximum effect. If Pastor Steve would say anything about this plan, it would be this: work hard and leave the results to God. Work hard and leave the results to God. Pharaoh had his centennials. They were walking the paths and throughout the village. Pharaoh's daughter here had her centennials. They would be watching for any critters in the water, any peeping toms or paparazzi that might want to come along and see Pharaoh's daughter in the river. And so Jochebed comes up with a plan to have a centennial, and that would be Miriam. There's a lot of praying that's going on in this story that you and I don't necessarily see, but could you picture this? That once the basket was made and the pitch was put on it and maybe some straw down in the bottom of it, and little baby Moses with a clean diaper was placed in this basket, and they carefully walked down to the river and placed that basket, that Jochebed went back home. Miriam was left on the riverbank watching. Dad and Mom and Aaron were home praying while Miriam was praying and watching. You got to think about the river's current. There's a current to every river, but they thought about that, and so they took the basket and they hid it inside the reeds where the current wouldn't sweep it away. They had to have been thinking about crocodiles and snakes and any kind of a fish that might want to get into that basket, but oh no, wait a minute, they put pitch on it. It stinks. It masks human scent. Kind of smart, wasn't it? They had to be thinking about Pharaoh's henchmen that would have been walking anywhere looking for any hidden babies, but instead the basket is made out of the same reeds in which it is hidden. It's camouflaged. What about that? Jochebed is thinking now about Pharaoh's daughter. They know where she bathes. They know when she bathes. They know that there are maidens there to keep other people away while the daughter of Pharaoh is bathing.